The biting chill of a late California autumn night clawed at Julian Thorne, even through the thick, designer jacket he wore. His breath plumed in ragged clouds, quickly swallowed by the inky blackness that pressed in on Whispering Pines estate, a sprawling, secluded enclave where wealth bought more than just square footage. It bought silence. Only the raw, unblinking glare of his heavy-duty pickup truck's headlights tore through the gloom, carving out a stark, skeletal stage in the dense thicket of pines at the farthest edge of his property. Long, distorted shadows danced and stretched with every heave of his shovel, mocking his efforts. The metallic clang of steel against rock, muted by the damp earth, echoed only in his ears. He worked with a furious, desperate urgency, each shovel load of soil flung with a controlled violence that spoke of more than just physical exertion. Before dawn, he muttered, the words rasping, tasting like dust and grim resolve. His hands, usually so steady when navigating the intricate spreadsheets of his financial empire, trembled now, not from fear, but from the raw effort and a barely contained tremor of triumph. A sheen of cold sweat plastered strands of his impeccably styled hair to his forehead, mixing with the fine, gritty soil. His muscles ached, a deep, pervasive throb that ran from his shoulders down to his lower back. But his eyes, flinty and devoid of compassion, remained fixed on the task. With each shovelful, a wave of dark satisfaction, bitter and sharp, washed over him, laced with an enduring, acrid resentment. Eleanor, her face, her defiant eyes, her stubborn refusal to yield, they flashed in his mind's eye, a persistent, irritating image that fueled his frantic pace. He had to ensure no trace remained, no loose ends, no telltale signs for prying eyes. This had to be seamless, an immaculate disappearance, a testament to his foresight and meticulous planning. He packed the soil down with the back of his shovel, then with his boots, flattening the freshly turned earth, trying to erase the obvious disturbance, to blend it back into the wild, untamed fringe of his manicured estate. The scent of pine needles, damp earth, and something metallic, something vaguely reminiscent of the copper wiring in an old fuse box, hung heavy in the cold air. Julian Thorne, the name synonymous with shrewd investments and formidable financial consulting in the greater Los Angeles area, was a man who cultivated an image, polished suits, an eloquent, measured tone, and an air of quiet authority that drew clients and commanded respect. He moved through high society galas and exclusive country clubs with an effortless grace, a carefully constructed facade of the successful, benevolent patriarch. But beneath that veneer, a different man lurked, a man consumed by an insatiable hunger for control, a chilling arrogance, and an unwavering belief in his own supreme entitlement. Money wasn't just a tool. It was the ultimate arbiter of power, the very measure of a man's worth, and his own position in the world was paramount, non-negotiable. Eleanor Vance, his now absent wife, had once been a part of that carefully curated world, or so he had intended. A talented landscape architect, she had built her own company from the ground up, her designs gracing the estates of celebrities and tech moguls across California. Her name, like his, carried weight, but hers was built on creativity and integrity, not calculated acquisition. Eleanor was more than just successful. She was fiercely independent, a mother who poured her heart into her children, 10-year-old Lily and 7-year-old Ethan. She possessed a bedrock of strong moral values, an unyielding spirit that Julian had initially found intriguing, then increasingly infuriating. In his eyes, her independence had mutated into defiance, her strength into obstinacy. She was, quite simply, an obstacle to his absolute control, a constant, irritating reminder that some things, some people, could not be bought or bent to his will. She had threatened his rights, his perceived dominion over their shared life, and most unforgivably, over his time's children. Their marriage, from early on, had been a landscape riddled with fault lines. Arguments, sharp and often brutal, had become as common as the California wildfires, flaring up with terrifying predictability. They often centered on finances, on Julian's attempts to dictate Eleanor's spending, or on his disdain for her personal choices, which he deemed extravagant or imprudent. Custody disputes over Lily and Ethan, even before the divorce papers were filed, were veiled threats, insidious hints at his power. Eleanor's burgeoning career, once a source of joint pride, became a battleground. Julian, seeing her success as a direct challenge to his authority, a drain on her primary duty as a wife and mother, in his antiquated view. He recalled one evening, years ago, when Eleanor had confided in her best friend, Ava Sterling, about his veiled threats to sabotage her most prestigious projects if she didn't fall in line. He had overheard fragments of that phone call, the raw edge of fear in Eleanor's voice, followed by her defiant, hushed promises to Ava that she wouldn't let him break her. That memory, even now, sent a familiar prickle of rage through him. She had underestimated him, consistently. The very foundation of their union, the prenuptial agreement, was a constant, festering wound for Julian. Eleanor, shrewd and prescient, had insisted on it before their marriage, determined to protect her significant family inheritance and to secure a stable financial future for any children they might have, independent of Julian's often volatile business ventures. He had signed it, of course, with a dismissive wave and a patronizing smile, convinced he would eventually find a loophole or simply charm her into abandoning it. Instead, it had become a symbol of her stubborn independence, a constant personal insult, and a perceived robbery of the vast wealth he believed he was entitled to. He saw it not as protection for her and their children, but as a deliberate withholding, a cruel taunt of the millions he felt were rightfully his times, by virtue of being her husband. Over the years, Julian's controlling behavior had escalated from verbal barbs and financial manipulation to a chilling, systematic campaign of coercive control. He'd had devices installed on Eleanor's car, tracking her movements with unnerving precision, her every stop, every detour, reported back to an app on his phone. Her personal calls and texts were often intercepted or mirrored, giving him a constant stream of information he would later weaponize in arguments. He'd routinely accidentally cut the internet at her home office, or disable the security camera system during the times she was away on business, leaving her feeling vulnerable and constantly on edge. He remembered the day the X-Acto knife came into play. An argument about the children's private school tuition had escalated, fueled by Eleanor's refusal to sign off on one of his speculative investments. In a fit of cold, calculated fury, he had snatched a sharp X-Acto knife from her drafting table. He hadn't touched times her asterisk. No, he was too clever for that. But he had methodically, deliberately, sliced through several meticulously rendered architectural plans for a multi-million-dollar resort project, her magnum opus at the time, right in front of her. The sound of the blade tearing through the crisp vellum, the slow, deliberate mutilation of her intellectual labor, had been designed to inflict maximum psychological damage. He recalled the look on her face, not fear, not anger, but a profound, sickening betrayal. She had retreated, called her brother Michael Vance, her voice shaking, asking him to just listen, to calm her. Julian had stood there, watching her, a strange mixture of satisfaction and frustration churning within him. He wanted her to break, to beg, but she merely regrouped, resilient as ever. Until now, the true catalyst, the final, undeniable spark that ignited the inferno of Julian's premeditated rage, had arrived just 11 days before this fateful night. The California Supreme Court had issued a landmark ruling, an unexpected judicial decision that dramatically strengthened the legality of prenuptial agreements, particularly in cases involving clearly inherited personal assets. This verdict had utterly annihilated Julian's carefully constructed divorce strategy. His lawyers, after months of confident assurances, had delivered the crushing news. His entire leverage, his calculated path to extracting a massive financial settlement from Eleanor, had dissolved. The tens of millions he had envisioned were now firmly beyond his grasp. It was the ultimate humiliation, the final, undeniable proof that Eleanor, even in their separation, continued to defy him, to win. The frustration and simmering hatred that had been building for years finally boiled over, transforming into a cold, lethal resolve. The plan, in truth, had been brewing for months, a dark, insidious seed planted long ago and nurtured in the shadows of his mind. The grave, the very one he was now frantically covering, hadn't been dug in a moment of panicked impulse. No, Julian had started it discreetly, months prior, in the deep, overgrown section of his property, far from the watchful eyes of any neighbor or gardener. He'd presented it to the occasional curious glance as a new landscaping project, a spot where he intended to plant some mature specimen trees. He'd used a heavy-duty shovel and worked late at night, under the guise of an energetic, if eccentric, homeowner. He'd purchased the oversized, rugged duffel bag from a camping supply store in a neighboring town, paying cash, its cavernous interior destined for a far grimmer purpose than carrying camping gear. And the weapon, a heavy, well-balanced felling axe, usually reserved for splitting stubborn logs for the fireplace. He had carefully hidden it in the dim recesses of his garden shed, tucked away behind a stack of old potting soil bags, eerily close to a dusty box of Lily's outgrown toys. Every detail, every element, had been painstakingly, chillingly prepared for this fateful night. That Friday evening had been deceptively quiet, a typical transition into the weekend. Eleanor had picked up Lily and Ethan from school, their laughter echoing briefly in the grand, empty foyer of her house before they settled into their evening routine. Later, after they were tucked into their beds, ostensibly asleep but likely still giggling and whispering, the final confrontation had begun. It wasn't loud, not at first. Julian had arrived, ostensibly to discuss the children's schedule for the coming week, but his true purpose was to deliver a final, chilling ultimatum. The conversation quickly devolved into a bitter rehashing of the court's ruling, his demands for alimony, and Eleanor's resolute refusal to yield another inch. Her voice, usually so steady, had risen slightly in exasperation. His had remained chillingly calm, imbued with a barely perceptible undercurrent of menace. In the living room, Lily and Ethan, oblivious, were engrossed in a particularly vibrant animated movie, its cheerful soundtrack a stark counterpoint to the growing tension in the kitchen. Eleanor's final cry, a choked gasp of disbelief and pain, was small, almost insignificant, swallowed by the lively sounds of the cartoon and the innocent, delighted giggles of her children. The brutal act itself was swift, merciless, and utterly devoid of emotion. Julian, moving with the practiced efficiency of a predator, had retrieved the axe from its hiding place moments before. It was a single, devastating blow, precisely as he had envisioned, cold and clinical. It was over almost before it began, the final, chilling punctuation mark to his long simmering rage. He stood over her for a moment, the axe heavy in his hand, his chest heaving, not with regret, but with the adrenaline of completion. Then, with a chilling calm that defied the horror he had just wrought, he walked into the living room. The vibrant colors of the cartoon flickered on the screen, reflecting in the children's wide, innocent eyes. Julian reached for the remote, switching off the television, plunging the room into a sudden, unsettling silence. "Lily, Ethan," he said, his voice level, almost soothing, a performance perfected in the dark corners of his mind. "Mommy has to go on an urgent business trip. Very urgent. Very far away. She won't be back for a while." He watched their faces, the slight frowns of confusion, Lily's immediate question, "But why, Daddy? She didn't say goodbye." He knelt, feigning a tender affection, stroking Lily's hair, then Ethan's. "Sometimes, grown-ups have to make quick decisions, darling. It's for work. She wants you to be good, and take care of everything." He tried to conjure a look of parental concern, a convincing mask over the abyss of his soul. "Now, off to bed. You both have school tomorrow." He guided them gently, almost lovingly, back to their rooms, tucking them in, murmuring reassurances about how much their mother loved them, how she'd be back eventually. The lie, spoken with such casual ease, hung heavy in the silent house, a poisonous whisper in the dark. Once the children were settled, their innocent questions silenced for the night, Julian returned to the kitchen. The duffel bag, large and dark, lay open on the pristine floor. He worked quickly, efficiently, his movements precise and unhesitating. He wrapped Eleanor's body, securing the bag tightly. The weight was significant, but his resolve was stronger. He dragged it, inch by agonizing inch, across the polished hardwood floors, through the back door, and across the dew-kissed, deserted garden. The rustling of the heavy fabric against the fallen leaves and the damp grass was the only sound in the profound silence of the night, a silent, chilling symphony accompanying his grim task. Finally, he reached the edge of the woods, the waiting maw of the earth, his carefully prepared grave. The morning light, usually a gentle balm over the rolling hills of California, felt harsh and unforgiving as it sliced through Ava Sterling's sleepless night. A knot of dread, tight and cold, had formed in her stomach the moment Eleanor's usual morning text, a witty meme or a quick "Good morning sunshine," hadn't arrived. She tried calling at 8 a.m., then 8:30, then 9. Each unanswered ring echoed with a mounting sense of alarm. Eleanor, meticulously punctual and unfailingly communicative, never just vanished. By 10 a.m., Ava's worry had curdled into outright panic. She called Michael Vance, Eleanor's older brother, his voice groggy with morning sleep, quickly sharpening with concern as Ava laid out her fears. "She's not answering. Julian picked up the kids from school yesterday, so she should be home. I've even tried the house phone, Michael. Nothing." An hour later, Ava's sleek electric car pulled up beside Michael's sturdy SUV at the imposing, wrought iron gates of Whispering Pines estate. The grandeur of Julian's property, usually a symbol of his opulent success, now felt oppressive, almost menacing. The long, winding driveway, flanked by ancient, whispering pines, seemed to stretch into an unsettling void. Michael, a man whose easygoing demeanor usually belied a core of unwavering strength, was already out of his car, his jaw set in a grim line. "This is insane," he muttered, running a hand through his slightly disheveled hair. "Maybe her phone died, or she's just taking a moment away from the divorce drama." But even as he spoke the words, he knew they sounded hollow. Eleanor wouldn't do that to her children. To them, not without a word. They rang the doorbell, a melodic chime that seemed eerily out of place. After a moment, Julian himself opened the door. He was impeccably dressed, as always, in a cashmere sweater and designer jeans, his hair perfectly coiffed, but his eyes held a carefully modulated sorrow. "Ava, Michael," he said, his voice a low, mournful murmur. "I suppose you're here about Eleanor." "Where is she, Julian?" Ava demanded, her voice tight with suppressed fear and a rising tide of suspicion. Her gaze swept past him, searching the foyer, the open living room, desperate for any sign of her friend. Julian sighed, a performance of profound weariness. "She's gone. She just left. Last night, after the kids were in bed, didn't say a word. Just her car gone, her purse on the counter, but no Eleanor. I told Lily and Ethan she had an urgent business trip, something sudden." He shook his head slowly, his gaze distant, as if reliving a painful memory. "This divorce has been incredibly hard on her, you know. The pressure, the stress of the court ruling. I think she just snapped. Needed to get away." Ava's blood ran cold. Asterisk. Snapped? Asterisk Eleanor? The woman who faced every challenge head on, who fought for her beliefs with an unshakable resolve? The woman who just won a landmark court case that Julian clearly despised? This wasn't Eleanor. And Julian's calm, almost rehearsed, sorrow felt chillingly artificial. Michael, too, narrowed his eyes. "You're saying she just abandoned her kids, Julian? Without a goodbye? Without a note? That doesn't sound like Eleanor." "People change under extreme pressure, Michael," Julian replied, his voice laced with a subtle hint of judgment. "You both know how volatile she's become. Always pushing, always arguing. I tried to reason with her about alimony, about the children's future, but she was intractable, unreasonable." He gestured vaguely with his hand. "Honestly, I think she just packed a bag and drove off to clear her head. She's been under immense strain. Perhaps she'll call when she's ready." Just then, Lily and Ethan appeared at the top of the grand staircase, their small faces etched with a childish confusion that tore at Ava's heart. "Auntie Ava! Uncle Michael!" Lily cried, rushing down the stairs, Ethan trailing behind. "Mommy went on a business trip. Daddy says it's very far." Ava knelt, pulling Lily into a hug, her eyes meeting Michael's over the top of the child's head, a shared, unspoken dread passing between them. The innocence in Lily's voice, the way she repeated Julian's carefully constructed lie, was a dagger to Ava's soul. This was wrong. All of it. "We need to call the police, Julian," Michael stated, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. Julian hesitated for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before he adopted a look of weary resignation. "If you must, but I assure you," Chez simply taking a break. "I've already tried to contact her work, her usual travel agents. Nothing." His cooperation felt thin, transparently superficial. The police arrived swiftly, their cruisers a stark, official presence against the manicured lawns of Whispering Pines. Detective Ramirez, a seasoned officer with weary but observant eyes, listened patiently as Ava and Michael recounted their fears, highlighting Eleanor's character, her steadfast dedication to her children, and the recent, acrimonious divorce proceedings. Julian, meanwhile, maintained his facade of the distraught ex-husband, offering hollow platitudes and carefully curated details. He emphasized Eleanor's unpredictability, her volatile nature under stress, and the extreme tension of their divorce, deftly shifting any potential blame onto her emotional state. He spoke of the unbearable pressure she was under, skillfully planting seeds of doubt about her mental stability. He suggested she might have gone to a remote family cabin in the Sierras, or perhaps even checked into a luxury wellness retreat under a false name, seeking solace. His suggestions, while plausible on the surface, were strategically designed to misdirect. A sprawling search operation commenced, a stark contrast to the quiet affluence of the estate. Uniformed officers fanned out across the vast, heavily wooded property, K-9 units sniffing through dense undergrowth, drones soaring silently overhead, their thermal cameras scanning the landscape. The sheer size and isolation of Whispering Pines, once a symbol of exclusivity, now made the search a daunting task. Days bled into one another, each passing hour dimming the fragile flicker of hope. Ava and Michael remained a constant, grim presence, their faces growing more drawn with every fruitless lead, every unanswered prayer. Julian, meanwhile, offered a perfunctory collaboration, answering questions with carefully chosen words, always steering the narrative back to Eleanor's distressed state and the mysterious nature of her departure. He never once suggested searching the most obvious place. He never once mentioned the recently disturbed earth at the far edge of his property, where the pine needles still lay thick and undisturbed, concealing a terrible secret beneath. 5 agonizing days later, the sickening truth finally clawed its way to the surface. It was a K-9 unit, relentless in its grim duty, that caught the scent. Deep within Julian's own property, in a secluded, overgrown thicket bordering the wilder expanse of the estate, they discovered a patch of freshly turned earth, poorly concealed beneath a scattering of pine boughs and hastily raked leaves. The ground, still soft and yielding from a recent rain, offered little resistance. The discovery was agonizing, immediate, and utterly devastating. The slight mound was Eleanor's grave, shallow and hastily dug. Her body, wrapped in a large, dark duffel bag, lay beneath, bearing the horrific, undeniable marks of a brutal assault. Forensic evidence was conclusive and irrefutable. Eleanor Vance had been murdered. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, inflicted by a heavy, sharp-edged weapon. There were signs of a brief struggle, of a desperate, futile attempt to ward off the fatal blow. The grim findings utterly obliterated Julian's fabricated narrative of Eleanor's self-imposed disappearance. Julian Thorne was arrested that same afternoon. The veneer of polite sorrow he had so carefully maintained shattered, replaced by a cold, almost detached, defiance. During his initial interrogation, he remained largely silent, offering only a terse, almost robotic statement through his newly appointed, high-powered defense attorney. "It was a sudden fit of rage. I lost control." He refused to elaborate, to confess to any details, any motive beyond that vague, self-serving declaration of temporary insanity. His silence spoke volumes, confirming what Ava and Michael had instinctively known all along. This was not a man consumed by grief, but by a chilling, calculating evil. The trial of Julian Thorne became a media circus, a chilling spectacle of wealth, privilege, and unspeakable violence. The courtroom, usually a somber arena of justice, crackled with tension and outrage. The prosecution, led by a formidable district attorney, presented a meticulously constructed case, a narrative of cold, calculated premeditation that painted Julian as a monster in tailored suits. They laid out the damning evidence. The pre-dug grave, started months in advance under the guise of a landscaping project. The felling axe, precisely identified as the murder weapon, hidden just days before the crime near Lily's old toys. The purchase of the oversized duffel bag paid for in cash, its purpose disturbingly clear. Julian's systematic campaign of coercive control leading up to the murder, the tracking devices, the disrupted security systems, the destruction of Eleanor's architectural plans. They detailed his lies to the children, his chillingly calm manipulation of their innocence, telling them their mother was on a long business trip just hours after her brutal murder. They presented experts who testified about the nature of domestic violence and coercive control, arguing that Julian's actions were the culmination of years of escalating abuse, not a sudden, unpredictable outburst. The motive was clear, they argued. The California Supreme Court's ruling, which had stripped Julian of millions, had pushed him over the edge, solidifying his intent to eliminate the obstacle that was Eleanor. They demanded a conviction for first-degree murder, a just retribution for such a heinous, calculated crime. But Julian Thorne had resources. His defense team, a phalanx of shrewd, expensive lawyers, launched a counterattack designed to sow doubt and exploit legal loopholes. They honed in on Julian's lone statement, a sudden fit of rage. They argued vehemently that the extreme emotional disturbance, EED, brought on by the intense stress of the bitter divorce, combined with the devastating financial blow of the court ruling, had pushed Julian to his breaking point. They painted a picture of a man overwhelmed, acting not with premeditated malice, but in a moment of uncontrollable, temporary madness. They brought in psychologists who testified about the psychological toll of high-conflict divorces, subtly suggesting that Eleanor's own intransigence and provoking behavior had contributed to Julian's loss of control. They highlighted his cooperation with the initial search, dismissing the pre-dug grave as merely an unfortunate coincidence, a gardening project gone awry, perhaps. They even tried to suggest Eleanor's actions earlier that night had triggered his emotional state. They spun a tale of a tragedy, not a calculated murder, a plea for leniency, for understanding. The jury deliberated for 4 torturous days. Ava and Michael sat through every agonizing moment, their hearts pounding with a desperate hope for justice, then sinking with every perceived glance of sympathy towards Julian from the jury box. The community, glued to news reports, held its breath. Then came the verdict. Despite the mountain of evidence pointing to cold-blooded premeditation, despite the irrefutable proof of a pre-dug grave and a hidden weapon, despite Julian's chilling manipulation of his own children, the jury, swayed by the defense's powerful narrative of emotional turmoil and the legal complexity of intent, found Julian Thorne guilty, not of first-degree murder, but of voluntary manslaughter, or, in a shocking twist, facilitated by a last-minute plea deal aimed at avoiding a potentially hung jury, a reduced charge of second-degree murder with specific mitigating factors cited as extreme emotional disturbance. The sentence, a mere 10 to 15 years with the possibility of parole, felt like a slap in the face of justice. A collective gasp of disbelief rippled through the courtroom. Ava clutched Michael's hand, her knuckles white. A raw, visceral scream tore from her throat, quickly muffled by Michael's embrace. Tears streamed down his face, not just for Eleanor, but for the profound betrayal of the legal system. Julian Thorne, the orchestrator of such an unspeakable crime, stood impassively as the verdict was read, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips, a testament to his continued belief in his own untouchability. The outrage that erupted among Eleanor's friends, family, and the wider community was immediate and profound. Justice, they felt, had not merely been delayed, it had been fundamentally, devastatingly denied. The monster had won. The crushing weight of injustice, however, did not break Ava Sterling and Michael Vance. Instead, it forged a new, unshakable resolve within them. Their grief, sharp and unrelenting, transformed into a fierce, burning purpose. "We can't let this be Eleanor's ending," Ava whispered to Michael one evening, her voice hoarse from crying but imbued with a new steel. "Her children deserve more. Every victim deserves more." From the ashes of their despair, the Eleanor's Light Foundation was born. Its mission was dual-pronged and deeply personal: to provide solace and support to victims of domestic violence and coercive control, and to tirelessly advocate for legal reforms that would prevent other families from suffering the same devastating betrayal of justice. They started small, out of Eleanor's former architecture studio, now stripped bare of her designs, but filled with a new kind of blueprint, one for systemic change. Their early days were marked by relentless, often exhausting work. They held press conferences, their voices shaking but unwavering, sharing Eleanor's story with raw honesty. They spoke at community centers, at women's shelters, at local universities, their message resonating with countless hidden victims. Michael, using his background in business and logistics, built the operational framework, while Ava, with her innate compassion and powerful public speaking skills, became the face of the nascent movement. The story of Eleanor Vance, a talented architect and devoted mother, murdered by her controlling ex-husband, who then received a shockingly lenient sentence, began to gain national traction. It was a story that laid bare the insidious nature of coercive control, often invisible to the outside world, and the glaring inadequacies of a legal system ill-equipped to address it. Among those moved by Eleanor's tragedy was Senator Emily Hayes, a formidable figure in California politics and a long-time, passionate advocate for women's rights and social justice. Senator Hayes, a woman of sharp intellect and unwavering moral compass, had dedicated her career to dismantling systemic inequalities. She saw in Eleanor's story not just a personal tragedy, but a microcosm of a much larger societal failure. The details of the pre-dug grave, the calculated manipulation, and the shockingly lenient verdict resonated deeply with her. She met with Ava and Michael, listening intently to their vision, her own eyes reflecting a quiet fury. "This isn't just about Eleanor," she told them, her voice calm but resolute. "This is about every woman, every man, every child, trapped in the invisible cage of coercive control. We have to change the law." Senator Hayes pledged her full support, becoming an ardent champion for what would soon be known as Eleanor's Law. This groundbreaking piece of legislation aimed to significantly strengthen the legal definitions of domestic violence and coercive control, ensuring that patterns of abusive behavior, manipulation, and financial sabotage could be presented as evidence of premeditation in murder cases. Crucially, it sought to eliminate the legal loopholes that allowed perpetrators like Julian Thorne to claim extreme emotional disturbance as a mitigating factor when their actions were clearly the culmination of a long-standing, calculated campaign of abuse. It was a bold, ambitious bill, promising a seismic shift in how the legal system would approach such crimes. Several years cascaded by, each one building on the foundations laid by Ava and Michael's grief and determination. The Eleanor's Light Foundation blossomed from a small, local initiative into a powerful national organization. Its network of safe houses provided refuge to thousands of victims fleeing abusive relationships. Its team of dedicated counselors offered healing and empowerment, and its pro bono legal aid services helped countless individuals navigate the complexities of the justice system, ensuring they had advocates in their corner. The name Eleanor Vance, once a whispered tragedy, had become a beacon of hope and resilience. Lily and Ethan, no longer the confused children of that terrible night, had grown into thoughtful, resilient teenagers. The scars of their past remained, invisible but deep, yet they had found solace and strength in their mother's enduring legacy. They often spoke at foundation events, their voices clear and courageous, sharing fragments of their story, not as victims, but as powerful testaments to Eleanor's unwavering love and the urgent need for change. "Mom never gave up," Lily would say, her eyes shining with fierce pride. "And neither will we. Her light will keep shining." Ethan, quieter but equally committed, found solace in the Foundation's outreach programs, helping younger children understand and articulate their feelings, ensuring no one felt alone in their pain. On a crisp autumn evening, reminiscent of the very night Eleanor was taken, thousands gathered in a sprawling park in downtown Los Angeles for the annual Eleanor's Light Vigil. Ava Sterling, her hair now streaked with silver but her spirit undimmed, stood beside Michael Vance, whose stoic strength had become a quiet pillar of the movement. Between them stood Senator Emily Hayes, her presence commanding, her commitment unwavering. Eleanor's law, after years of fierce debate and tireless lobbying, was on the cusp of passing in the state Congress, garnering widespread bipartisan support. The air buzzed with a palpable sense of triumph, mixed with the quiet reverence for the woman whose name united them all. As darkness descended, Ava spoke, her voice ringing out, clear and strong, through the crisp night air. "Tonight, we remember Eleanor. We remember her laughter, her brilliance, her fierce love. We remember the injustice that sought to silence her, but we also celebrate the light she sparked." With a gesture, she lit a single candle, its flame dancing against the encroaching shadows. One by one, hands reached out, igniting thousands more, until the park glowed with a galaxy of shimmering lights. Each flame was a silent testament to a life protected, a voice heard, a future rebuilt. The myriad of flickering candles symbolized the enduring light they were bringing to others, an undeniable force pushing back against the darkness of violence and injustice. The journey had been long, arduous, and fraught with pain, but the struggle for justice, for a more equitable system, would never cease. Eleanor Vance, the talented architect, the devoted mother, the woman Julian Thorne tried to erase, lived on, not just in the memories of those who loved her, but in the heart of a movement dedicated to ensuring that no other light would ever be extinguished without a fierce, unyielding fight for true justice.